Sustainable Stow, we hope to cover a wide range of topics related to climate change and what we all need to do in coming years to respond. So a lot of changes ahead. We will all need to get involved. Tonight, we begin by looking at the ways climate change is affecting wildlife right here and now already in our area. Our guide is Joy Marzolf of The Joys of Nature. Joyce loved animals from the time she was a child growing up in New England and would always take advantage of any outdoor time to explore nature. She has a degree in biology, has been doing a variety of animal-related education programs in her professional life for more than 20 years. For the past 13 years, Joy was a naturalist and educator at Mass Audubon's Broadmoor Wildlife Sanctuary. She has taught numerous programs for a wide range of ages on topics including butterflies and dragonflies, reptiles and amphibians, mammals, animal tracking, and photography. She's also been a naturalist trip leader for marine-related trips for the Oceanic Society. You can learn more about Joy's various educational programs at her website, thejoysofnature.com. So right now, I'd like to welcome and turn it over to Joy. Thanks for being here, Joy.
Thank you so much. So I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen here. For this particular program, I'm actually starting with kind of a boring first slide, but I'm doing that on purpose. I promise you there will be some other prettier slides along the way, but the first thing I want to address is that climate change can really seem like an overwhelming issue. But I do want to make sure that you are aware that really Massachusetts is in many ways leading the way with a lot of aspects of climate change. Many towns within Massachusetts are also making great strides, and we're going to talk more about some specific things that you can do along the way. But I just want to make sure that everybody knows, don't worry, there's some serious things that we need to think about, but part of what you're doing today is also making a difference. So let's start with some of the basics. Just to clarify, weather is actually what we see today. Climate covers long-term trends. That's one of the most important things to understand because people get confused about them all the time. So furthermore, 19 of the 20 warmest years have all occurred in the last 2 decades, with the highest ever recorded temperatures in many places around the world being in the last few years. So we really have a trend of rising temperatures that has actually dated back to when we first started really keeping records. 10 of the last 10 years have been the hottest on record. Think about that. That really kind of makes you think about, wow, what's really happening. So some of the things you may have heard about, Arctic sea ice is melting to record lows. Death Valley, the hottest, driest, and lowest national park in California and Nevada, recorded a preliminary high temperature of 130 degrees Fahrenheit. That seems just unlivable for sure. And 2020 was the hottest summer in Phoenix ever recorded. For the National Weather Service, the average maximum temperature the summer of 2020 was 107.9 degrees. They actually rounded it up for websites and things like that afterwards. And the average temperature during the summer of 2020 was 96 degrees. So imagine that was the average temperature throughout the day was well in excess of 90 degrees. That really kind of brings it home when you think about it. So I'm going to move on to a little bit more of how do we talk about climate science. So there's a couple of things that we want to consider here, and I'm going to have the library go ahead and admit the person there that's sitting in the waiting room. There's a little bit of a need to break things down into more manageable pieces. So we're going to talk a little bit more about these various parts. Heat trapping blanket. This is one of the analogies that's oftentimes used, and we'll talk about these each one at a time. So rampant carbon dioxide is also something that we're going to think about. and then also oceans, including circulation and chemistry or osteoporosis of the sea. So there's a great organization called the Sightline Institute. You can see their website information right here. And that certainly is where I got this information. But you can certainly find it in other places too, but that's just something to be aware of. So let's talk about the heat trapping blanket. How does this warming actually happen? So some greenhouse gases already occur naturally in the environment. Things that you can probably understand, like water vapor, carbon dioxide, even methane and nitrous oxide and ozone are sometimes naturally in the environment. However, others can either come from human activity or be increased due to human activity. So some examples of things coming from agricultural and industrial activities might be nitrous oxide. And also that can come during combustion of solid waste and fossil fuels. Methane can be emitted. Hydrofluorocarbons, perfluorocarbons, and sulfur hexafluoride are generated in industrial processes and are not naturally occurring. So we're really talking about a number of different natural, increased natural, and artificially created chemicals that are causing this greenhouse gas. Think about just putting on a blanket. That helps to insulate us. This is how the greenhouse gas effect works, is like a blanket on literally the planet. So how do we actually affect the climate? So there are a number of different ways that we can actually affect it through human activity. And scientists really do agree. This is not a dilemma. Sometimes we hear on various, shows or TV things that this is a dilemma. This really is not. Climate scientists and scientists in this field agree the planet is warming. There is not a question about that. But by gathering more data, we can see how more and more carbon dioxide can influence the path that we're on and at what rate. So one of the things, of course, about science is we're learning more every day, but we do have history over time that is showing the path that we're on, and it is certainly not looking good right now. How can all of these things that we're doing contribute? So, and I'm going to ask that if someone can mute themselves. I heard a little background noise there. So, if we reduce the carbon dioxide that we're putting into the atmosphere right now, this will definitely make a difference. If we continue on this path, we will no longer have much of a choice. So the key is to do things while we can right now. With all of the different ways that we contribute carbon dioxide, you might be surprised with a few of the things I'm going to talk about along the way. So this is something that has come up sort of here and there that is not directly something that I could fix or you could fix, but it's good to be aware of where are some of these other sources. So this I actually got right from the Environmental Defense Fund's website, and it's talking about methane leaks. Now we think about one of the ways that many people warm their houses is through natural gas, but think about how much natural gas gets to your house and how much might leak out before it ever gets there in the first place. Natural gas has often been touted as a greener fossil fuel, but so many emissions can result from leaks and routine venting during production that we don't realize how much we're wasting. So the Government Accountability Office, the US government, estimates about 40% of natural gas is estimated to be vented and flared on onshore federal leases, and this amount could be captured. So 40% of the amount that's vented could actually be captured with currently available control technologies. So it's like saying for every dollar that you spend, if you wasted 50 cents out of that dollar, you'd say, this is crazy. Why would I throw away my money? But that is exactly what's being done with several of these various things that I'm talking about, including natural gas. So one of the keys is you have to find the problem in order to be able to fix it. So this particular slide is courtesy of Reuters, And you can see this particular company estimated that one leak was spewing out 93 tons of methane every hour. The daily amount was equivalent to 15,000 cars in the US. So it's pretty amazing when you think of how much is being wasted. What can we do as individuals? One of the things that we can do is also make sure companies and governments are accountable. And again, I'm just going to ask that if the library can just check and see who needs to be muted, please. So when we talk about climate change, I often hear, well, it's not affecting me, or is it? So let's take a look at last year. NOAA actually released the final 2020 updates to its there we go. So 2020 billion-dollar disaster report. Think about that, billions and billions of dollars. This officially confirmed what communities across the nation experienced firsthand. 2020 was a year of extremes. So when we look at all of these various things that affected how much money was spent around the United States, a lot of these things are directly climate change related. So Western fires, tornadoes, we're going to talk about a lot of these other things, but anytime we're starting to talk about billions of dollars, you know there's a lot of money involved here. So let's take a look at the billion-dollar disaster event count. This is the number of billion-dollar events each year, the number of them. That is a lot. And you can see the costs each year are going up as well. No matter the year, you can see not only are we seeing more billion-dollar events, but also the trend is up in general. Pay attention to 2005 right here. There's an arrow on that. We're going to get back to that in a minute. Here it's split out by category. Now, obviously, certain things affect us here in the Northeast more than others. Wildfires tend to be more out west. Droughts can affect us, but tend to be more out west. But you can see we are affected by other things, which we'll get to. 2020 was only the second time the Greek alphabet was ever used to name storms. Remember that 2005? That was Hurricane Katrina. You probably remember that was a pretty big one. So its damage is not just due to wind from storms, but also flooding, which has certainly been catastrophic in the South. We've just been hearing about storms in the South recently on the news. So disasters increasing. How is this affecting us? Well, think about just the cost to companies, insurance companies, all sorts of groups, and the economy in general. In the last 5 years, the total cost of US in billions of dollars, $600 billion plus. That's a lot of money, and certainly money that could be hopefully much better spent on other things, but we just don't have a choice right now. 5-year annual cost averaging $121 billion plus. And in the last 10 years, $890 billion plus. That's a lot of money. When we think about the money that's been spent over COVID, people have been concerned about hearing about trillions of dollars. We've been spending this on just climate-related disasters. So one of the things you've probably been noticing recently in the news, hurricanes and tornadoes around the nation are certainly increasing. This photo was actually taken by a friend of mine in Kentucky from an EF4 tornado several years ago. So severe weather is definitely on the rise, and the result is extremely costly. So this is definitely something that we all need to be thinking about, and how might it affect people that we know? How might it affect us? As of July 8th, 2020, NOAA, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, reported that the US had experienced 10 weather disasters that exceeded $1 billion in damages, $1 billion. So this 2020 was the 6th year in a row with at least 10 major weather events so extreme, a record in and of itself. So how about, let's get a little closer to home. I grew up here. I grew up in the Western burbs. A tornado in the Northeast? I never grew up with tornadoes. I never heard of tornadoes here growing up in Massachusetts. But there were 2 in 2019 in Connecticut, and nearly 24 just in 2018 here in the Northeast. There have even been tornadoes in recent years on Cape Cod. Who would have thought there would have been a tornado in Cape Cod? Or, do you remember There have been a couple in the in sort of the central west part of Massachusetts as well. So we're definitely seeing increases here. Tornadoes become more common here when tropical air masses work their way up from the south. That often occurs with warm fronts. So the more warm fronts we have coming from the south with increased warm weather and more temperatures down there, the more likely we are to see tornadoes here. And I don't know about you, I used to live in the Midwest. I do not enjoy seeing tornadoes. They're actually kind of scary. So what other changes are we seeing here? So more extreme weather is not just tornadoes. Reminder, weather is an event, climate is over time. So we're talking here about trends that we're seeing. So we're seeing severe winter storms that have more than doubled over the past 55 years in comparison to the last 60 years. However, more precipitation is falling in the form of rain or freezing rain than snow. The impacts of winter storms can definitely vary and be localized to just particular areas of the state. And evidence is suggesting that nor'easters are becoming more intense and occurring more often in New England overall than it has been in the past. So we're definitely seeing changes in how much and what kinds of precipitation that we're having. So certainly over the past several decades, we've experienced strong increases in the frequency and intensity of these extreme precipitation events. Flooding events have been rising in association with this precipitation as well. The Connecticut River Basin is a good example of just an area in the Northeast that's experienced more than a doubling of heavy rainfall events in the past 60 years. So depending on where you are, you're seeing differences throughout the state. So when we think desert and drought, we oftentimes think out west, right? But this is not how it's always been, even out there. So in the southwestern US, the habitat has changed dramatically from grass and shrubland in the 1800s now to desert. There are many factors for this change, including climate change, as well as overuse of water resources and overgrazing of livestock. That's only exacerbated the problem. And you've probably heard about the 2019 Western wildfire season. Even 2020 was certainly a problem, but that one was the most expensive ever in the West, over $80 billion. The $142 billion estimate for 2019 also includes losses due to the California wildfires and wildfires out west. Now, these fires are not caused simply by climate change. It's very complicated for sure, but it's being exacerbated. Now, 2020 definitely eclipsed the number of acres burned in 2019. As of September 21st, 2020, 78 large fires in the West burned 3.9 million acres, with over 32,000 firefighters and support personnel assigned to wildfires. So if you think about it, that's a lot of manpower being put towards that. In many cases, they have to borrow firefighters from other places too. And think about how many times we might have wanted to go on vacation to one of these beautiful areas out west as well. But let's talk about literally how it's affecting us. You say, it's 3,000 miles away. It's not affecting us, right? But last year, there were exploding fires in Oregon and Washington, and even British Columbia and Canada, as well as California. This is not typical for these areas. These are temperate rainforests. Rainforests don't make you think forest fires, do they? And there are cascade effects here. So there's certainly been selective logging, which has led to tree biodiversity loss, invasive grasses, and other things have increased the chances that these fires would be damaging. But warmer winters have also brought problems with insects, such as bark beetles, that would normally not kill trees. Now they're reproducing faster and increasing in numbers, which is causing many, many more dead trees. So how did we see a difference? So 2020 made it pretty clear. I want you to think back. Do you recall hearing the smoke from Portland, Oregon made its way to us here in Massachusetts? I saw it. I smelled it. I was thinking it was a local brush fire or something. To think that that fire, the effects of that fire traveled over 3,000 miles and hit us here in Massachusetts. Add to that, maybe if you have breathing problems as well, that certainly was not helping if you had a case of asthma. Imagine if it was bad for us here. Just how bad it was for them there. For 5 consecutive days, beginning Thursday, September 10th, Multnomah County and Oregon saw emergency room visits for asthma-like symptoms far exceeded normal levels. It actually resulted in the worst air quality ever recorded. It was referred to by emergency room doctors as off the charts. This is what it looked like in downtown Portland. Pretty amazing. So let's talk about in other places around the world you might have heard of too. Extreme temperatures and droughts also helped to contribute to the recent fires in Australia. They sweltered through their hottest spring and November on records. And 2019 was the previous hottest record. So it's only been increasing and increasing. But how does this affect them? It's not just drought, dryness, and fires. But in South Africa, I actually have friends that live in Cape Town, and they actually had the most extreme drought that literally cracked the reservoir basin. This is in October in 2019. The extreme drought in South Africa actually led to such water rationing where only the very wealthy could be guaranteed water. My friends Brian and Robin in Cape Town actually at one point went down to one very short shower a week in 2018, using dishwater to flush toilets and limiting any other water use. In many places, public water went dry. There was no more water to be had. Can this affect us? There's no question. It affects us here in the United States already. Areas of Arizona and California are already in what they are calling a mega drought, and also experiencing extreme loss of groundwater that's literally dropped the height of the land, sometimes even a matter of feet. Death Valley again hit 130 degrees Fahrenheit on August 16th, 2020. That's pretty amazing to think of that. But let's get close to home again. Parts of Massachusetts are already in drought in one of the months that's usually our wettest. Look at the date. This is the most recent of our current status. This is the most recent map available. Data from April 6, 2020, released April 8th, 2021, I should say. So this is the most current thing that's available on the state of Massachusetts website. We are all in abnormally dry conditions in a very normally wet month. So even the first half of March was ranking number 4. We've had red flag warnings for critical fire weather conditions this past March, again in a wet month. But think about heat-related illness and how this might be impacted with climate change here. Boston may experience 33 days per year that exceed 100 Fahrenheit by 2100. So think about how much you would enjoy 100-degree days. I certainly would not. But that can also lead to hospitalizations and other related illnesses, especially in areas where people are more vulnerable and people who are older as well. Let's get to how that could affect wildlife. Here's a vernal pool drying up in a case of drought. Now, vernal pools are seasonal pools. They're often meant to eventually dry up, and commonly many of the species can survive in normal circumstances. But if these vernal pools dry up too fast, egg masses and tadpoles may not survive. Wood frogs and other species like many species of salamander rely on vernal pools to retain some water until they can finish their developmental cycle. And over the past several decades, severe and prolonged episodes of drought are becoming more commonplace, not only throughout North America, but also here in parts of the Northeast. Tadpoles and frogs also provide food for many other species, while amphibians also provide important insect control. So you can also, in many cases, find insects like dragonflies that also will reproduce in vernal pools as well. Because of cascade effects, not having tadpoles could lead to not enough food for other species as well. So I don't know if any of you like snow sports like cross-country skiing or snowshoeing, but in more recent years, winters have not had as much snow. This was actually kind of a more normal year this year. A lot of people were going out to Wachusett Meadow to go skiing. And many years ago, I used to keep my skis in my office each winter. Not in more recent years, though. I literally thought, wow, this is like the old days where you could ski in the wintertime. In fact, some of you may remember the blizzard of '78. This is me actually in my little snowsuit where they never came to plow our road in Newton. My dad and two friends actually had to snow blow the street because they never ever came. It was such a huge storm. Thinking about more recent years, there just aren't snow days like that anymore. You might have a snow day here and people complain about shoveling there, but nothing like it was back then or many years before. Let's get to how this might affect you personally. You say, doesn't really matter. If I don't have to shovel, not a big deal. How many of you really like maple syrup? Especially on your maybe blueberry pancakes. I would definitely be one of those. Can you imagine a life without maple syrup? I'd be pretty sad, let me tell you. We are at the southern range of the sugar maple tree. Climate change is definitely causing slower growth of these trees and may cause the loss of this species here in Massachusetts. Most temperate species, including sugar maples, have a chilling requirement, meaning that a certain number of cold days is required before the buds are able to break dormancy. These trees have to go through that cold spell in order to go through their normal processes. But it's also going to change what species we have in general. Warmer winters are affecting the composition of our forests, shifting of species as well as loss of species. So on the left, you can see here's basically where we are currently. We have a lot of different pine-related species, maples, birches, and beeches, things like that. The center column is expected change even if greenhouse gases are reduced, starting right now. On the right, if emissions continue to rise, as temperatures rise, northern hardwoods will lose their advantage and more southern species will take over. So as a result of these changes, we can also expect to see fewer of certain bird species that depend on these northern hardwoods. So I bet a lot of you are not big poison ivy fans. You may have realized something's been going on with the poison ivy in more recent years. This is called unintended consequences from climate change. We're seeing much more poison ivy than we did in the past. Warmer winters are also leading to a longer growing season of poison ivy. Not only that, but as shown in lab tests, more carbon dioxide causes the chemical that makes us itch, urushiol, to be more chemically concentrated, causing many people to be much more sensitive to poison ivy. Definitely something to be aware of before you start pulling poison ivy from your yard. So more recently, we're also seeing temperatures in the 60s in the middle of winter. Sometimes this can cause animals to come out of hibernation too early, such as garter and water snakes. Garter snakes are a little bit more cold tolerant and can often handle it. They can be found as far north as northern Canada, but not so much with water snakes. In fact, in the last few years, I've actually found frozen dead water snakes out and about. Keep in mind, they are not a venomous species. Now, changing seasons around the world. I kind of love this phrase, but I sort of am sad by saying it at the same time. The age-old rhythm of the seasons is changing as some parts of the world heat up more rapidly than others. It's true. The change in caterpillar hatching times has affected migratory birds around the world, including places like the Netherlands. In Alaska and British Columbia, over 14 million acres of spruce trees were killed by bark beetles, opening them up to catastrophic fires. And in the US, fewer cold days has allowed the spread of pine beetles. So how does a changing climate affect wildlife? Well, the shifting precipitation for sure. Total precipitation and intensity of events all can change forest quality, understory, insect numbers, and fire patterns. What are we seeing here? Why am I showing you milkweed and a monarch butterfly? Milkweed flowering is out of sync with monarchs in recent years. Things are changing too fast for many animals and plants to adjust. While there have been changes in Earth's past, they were well over thousands and thousands, even millions of years. We have changes that have been affecting us and wildlife in our lifetimes, including even in the past 10 or more years. Inland flooding. If this came as snow, it would take much longer to melt, and the water flow would be much more spread out. If you live near a river, this may affect you. If you live near a stream, this may affect you. I bet a lot of you are somewhat close to some sort of water, but it may also affect animals you love to see. Loon nests are susceptible to irregular storms with the rise and fall of lakes in warmer weather when they're nesting. They can literally have their nests flooded out. You said, I don't have loons where I live. I bet you've seen these animals. Red-winged blackbird nests are also built close to the surface, and their babies are also at risk from heat, storms, and the rise of water. If they can't climb up to get away from the rising water, they will not survive. If the nests flood, they will not survive. But we're seeing new species coming in too. The Red Valley Woodpecker. I bet you've probably seen or heard them around you in Stowe. This bird has only become common in Massachusetts during the past 2 decades. An assessment of 305 common North American bird species found the average latitude of bird wintering ranges is now 40 miles further north than it was in the 1960s. You can see here, further and further and further north, and this process will continue with climate change. So thinking about later and wetter springs. Now this one was not quite so late and wet. This almost seemed back to normal. But in 2018, spring warming was so late, the dragonflies were over 5 weeks late coming out. That year, people also noticed mosquitoes out for quite a long time before it was warm enough for the dragonflies to finish maturing and to emerge. So we're definitely seeing changes with what is out when due to temperature. Getting out of sync tree swallows are a great example. Long distance migrants that breed in New England have declined faster than resident species. There are concerns that migratory species cannot adjust their migration schedules. They don't have a Zoom connection up here in Massachusetts to say, hey, should I leave? What's the timing? So they really depend on coinciding many states of their life cycles with the timing of insects or other foods. One other example here is the yellow warbler and other warbler species. These are all insect eaters. If the insects come out too early, and these animals depend on feeding insects and insect larvae to their young, the food may not be available when the adults or the young need it. So trees and flowering shrubs. These plants you may have noticed around us, these type of species you may have noticed, and I'll get to one I bet you have seen recently as well. But trees and shrubs respond to air temperatures, not soil temperatures. This can affect flowering and leaf emergence, which then can affect fruiting time as well. Now, we actually have a local scientist who's been doing some great research and has written a fantastic book called Walden Warming. His name is Richard Primack. He's from Boston University. I highly recommend his book. He's actually used research from hundreds of years, the last hundreds of years, to document when are the trees flowering, when are the shrubs flowering, and when are the native plants flowering as well. We're definitely seeing variations, no question, even between apple trees. If they're in a shadier area or more open area, you may have some variation even within a specific species or specific group of species. However, over time, we are definitely seeing changes here. Now, if you have allergies like I do, you may have paid a little bit more attention. The growing season in Massachusetts is approximately 10 days longer than it was before 1960. And we're also noticing ragweed season is longer too. Unfortunately, that's definitely affecting some of us with allergies. Ironically, this has been one of the benefits of wearing masks during COVID. I don't know about you, but I've been sneezing a lot less recently. So throughout the world, forests are really being altered in many ways by the rising temperatures associated with global climate change. And the earlier leaf out of trees and shrubs are one such example. So we're definitely seeing changes over time, even with the plants and trees that are right here. Now, how is this affecting other things? So Forsythia, any of you have Forsythia around you? You probably noticed it's out right now. It's definitely an early flowering shrub regardless. But in eastern Massachusetts, species leaf out over a 4 to 6 week period. We're seeing more leafing out earlier. And this can also affect food sources for other animals, particularly insects. Thinking about our bees and our butterflies. This timing is especially important for species that have gone through a long winter with little available food, or for those bird species that we talked about. Believe it or not, there are early butterflies that depend on food too. So emerging plants, those are a little different. They are going to respond to ground temperatures as they're emerging from root systems. Black-eyed Susans are one instance, and other flowers. They have been increasingly late in the past 10 years. We see things are going a little off kilter here. Columbine is a really great example of a flower that's important to hummingbirds. If the animals are coming back earlier with earlier air temperatures, the flowers they need for survival may not be out in time for them. So one of the things that Richard Primack found through his research was that forest wildflowers are emerging later as well, and are getting less and less of that sunny head start they rely on before the trees like oaks and maples have leafed out. This timing can lead to changes in forest plants. If they don't have that head start, they may not survive. So something else, fungus. Any of you have a garden at home? That can be something that you may have noticed as well if you have tomatoes. I know a lot of my friends who are gardeners have noticed we've had more cases in fungus on our tomatoes and other crops in more recent years too. Fungi are definitely a major pathogen of plants. But one of the things that you might have also noticed if you have allergies is sometimes people can be affected by allergic reactions to fungal toxins as well, by breathing in those spores. It can also potentially affect wildlife. We've had cases of fungal diseases in many of our snakes across the East Coast, and including right here in Massachusetts in more recent years. So sea level rise. Warming can definitely cause land and sea ice to melt, and the seawater to expand, causing sea level to rise too. So increasing temperatures are causing two things: more water in the ocean as well, and warmer water just taking up more space. So this is me in Alaska, definitely noticing that the glaciers had been melting and melting. There are many places that you can see. Here's the line where the glaciers were. Glacier National Park is a good example. When I was in Alaska in 2009, it was 75 degrees in August on land. In more recent years, they've even had temperatures in the Arctic in the 90s in the summer. This is just showing over time how it's been increasing. Snowpack's going down in Alaska and the Arctic too, but sea level closer to home. Yep, this was actually in the news. This has happened several years in downtown Boston. Literally water pouring down the steps at Aquarium T Station. Even if you don't live in Boston, it's also affecting other towns along the coast. The sea level since 1922 has risen in Boston Harbor by 10.4 inches. Add to that a king tide, add to that storms. Sea levels are rising faster along the New England coast than anywhere else in the planet. That's something to think about. This is a possible future map of Boston. This would affect the city a lot. Even if you don't live in Boston, think about how jobs here in Massachusetts, homes, people living in Massachusetts, businesses, and even tourism would be affected. So other effects on the ocean, not only is fresh water coming in from melting glaciers and leading to sea level rise, but that additional fresh water could possibly also change how much and how the ocean is actually circulating. If warmer water stops moving off our coast, that's one thing that keeps our temperatures warmer here in Massachusetts. I don't know about you, but North Dakota is a heck of a lot colder than it gets here in Massachusetts. I think I'd rather stay a little bit more moderate here. So affecting other wildlife. Coastal flooding is predicted to increase dramatically, and this can affect coastal nesting birds like plovers, as their areas where they can possibly nest will decrease. It also will affect other species too. So warmer temperatures in the water has already had a profound effect on marine food webs. It's affecting food sources for puffins, leading to their decline, as well as food sources for whales, wading birds, and will subsequently affect our food supply. This is also leading to additional whale mortality as the whales have moved to find food. Shipping lanes that were already moved to protect them are going to have to move yet again. Now, while sea turtles like this loggerhead turtle don't nest here, they do actually come here to visit us in the warmer months. And baby sea turtles are actually affected by temperatures. The temperature of the nest will actually determine the sex of the baby turtle. The warmer the temperature, the more female turtles there are. And of course, flooding of sea turtle nests can affect how many of these turtles we might see up here too. So now and in the future, seeing southern species like pileated woodpeckers here, anticipating losing our state bird, the black-capped chickadee, we're definitely already seeing trends in this direction. How about something else? Now, osteoporosis of the sea. We always think osteoporosis affects people, right? We're talking about climate breakdown here, long-term effects on the ocean. More carbon dioxide is leading to an acidification of the ocean, and this is actually disrupting food chains. Coral bleaching, you've probably heard about that on the Great Barrier Reef. Coral reefs are key habitats for fish that feed many millions of people around the world, and here too. One of the reasons why marine protected areas are so important is to try to remove other stresses as much as possible. Lots of stresses can include heat, ocean acidification, fishing and overfishing, boat and gear damage, and even chemicals such as sunscreen, pesticides, and other things. But again, how does that affect us? What does that mean for us? So we actually have corals off our coast. Corals provide lots of habitat for wildlife. But let me ask you this question, do you like lobster rolls? In addition to corals, our local marine life has been affected by warming oceans, such as shell disease in lobsters. And warmer temperatures are causing them to move deeper and further north. Many fish have also been moving as well, and this will affect fishing here in the Northeast. Can you imagine a New England without lobster? It's possible that this will happen. Now, ocean acidification also affects many animals that rely on calcium to build their shells. So this would include clams and also oysters and scallops. So ocean acidification is caused by carbon dioxide from the atmosphere being absorbed by the ocean, as well as that more fresh water going into the ocean. Fresh water is actually more acidic than salt water, kind of a double whammy. So do you like clam chowder? Our clams are going to be affected. Do you like scallops? They will be affected as well. And if you think about it, all of these animals are very important filter feeders and are a key part of the food chain in the ocean. So this is already affecting us in the ocean right now and will continue to affect us down the road. But warming water is also leading to this disruption of food chains, as I mentioned. This is also affecting diseases that are affecting sea stars. There's a wasting disease in the Atlantic and in the Pacific that has led to the decline of sea stars, which has led to an increase of sea urchins and then a decline of kelp. So again, getting nature out of whack. So what can we do? There are lots of things that we can do. Some people are considering electric cars. Now, not everybody can afford a really expensive Tesla, but other fuel efficient cars may be an option. I see many Toyota Priuses around as well, and they can get much better gas mileage. Who doesn't want to save money, right? Especially with gas going up in price. My little Prius has had over 60 plus miles to the gallon over the entire time that I've had it. That's the average. So what else can you do? A great way to conserve energy at home, drive less, bike more, walk more. A great way to get out with friends or family and still stay socially distanced during COVID. Maybe consider solar panels. Now, not everybody has a house that could necessarily put solar panels on, but when you can, it's a great thing to add on. So some homeowners are even charging their electric or hybrid electric cars this way at home. And it can definitely pay over time. So you can add energy efficient heat pump systems. Between heating efficiency and solar panels, my electric bills for the entire year are typically less than $80. Right now with my solar panels and heat pumps, my net metering has already started to count backwards. And I believe my electric bill for this entire year is probably going to be about $30. So I think it's even less than last year. So these units can also provide air conditioning or even a dry mode that can make it feel cooler by taking humidity out of the air. My AC was only on for 3 hours last summer because I just turned on the dry mode instead, and I added extra insulation in my attic. So natural solar heating. What did I do today? I actually let a little extra sun come in and a little heat come in from outside. On sunny days in the winter, I open the insulated drapes and let the sun come in. Some days, my heat never comes on. Definitely a handy thing for winter and spring. In the summer, I do the reverse. I make sure my drapes stay closed during the day to keep the heat out. So this is a great way to have free heating or cooling. Other options to move heat and help with cooling: fans, and of course, LED lights that don't provide extra heat and are also much more energy efficient. And pretty much any style of light can be found as an LED. So even the more old-fashioned type of chandelier type lights can be found as LED lights today. Other resources are also important to consider. In times of drought, saving water is also essential, but who wants to waste resources, right? Saving water can be done in many ways. At my house, I actually have a low flow shower head. You can even install a shut off or soap button that can shut off water at the shower for just a minute or two. Remember, you're also heating that hot water. You can also add rain barrels. Rain barrels are great for saving extra rainwater at home for times of drought. This technique is really important for some places in the world where drinkable water is actually scarce, such as low-lying tropical islands. So here you say, I'm not a low-lying tropical island, but how much water did you maybe have to use to water your yard when it got really dry last year? I didn't worry. I just took water from my rain barrels. Saving water and using more natural products can also lead to cleaner water, and plants can also lead to natural water filtration and better water quality too. So what are some other things we can do? Eat less meat. The livestock sector actually generates as much greenhouse gas emissions as all cars, trucks, and automobiles combined. Cattle ranchers have also clear-cut millions of square kilometers of forest for grazing pasture, also taking out natural carbon sinks. Small moves like meatless Mondays can make a big difference, especially with how much methane cows can produce. We even have great local farms right in and around Stowe, including some fantastic apple orchards too. So buying local can be a great opportunity to help too. Now, while we may not be going as much to the grocery store as we used to during COVID days, think about, did you think out of the box about rapidly ripening bananas, especially during early COVID? A lot of people were baking things like banana bread. How about a banana smoothie from frozen banana chunks? Pretty tasty on a hot day too. I actually did that last summer. But a recent article in The Atlantic talked about the role of food waste. Americans waste a lot of food, nearly 1/3 of all food produced. In fact, more than 130 billion pounds a year. That's billion with a B, worth roughly $160 billion. Food is the single biggest component of our country's landfills, and the average American sends more than 200 pounds of food there every year. That's more than 140 trillion calories a year getting tossed in the garbage. Think about all the people during COVID who've had food insecurity and what a difference that may have made. Experts point to a series of simple old-fashioned techniques we can use to really ensure that we're using our food more judiciously. Think about what maybe your relatives might have done in the Depression. Pretty similar things we could do today. Figuring out eating leftovers, storing food appropriately and at the right temperatures, preparing and freezing perishables instead of letting them linger and go bad, and shop in your refrigerator and cabinet before you hit the store. And households, not restaurants or schools or corporate cafeterias, are the dominant wasters. It's us. The problem is much worse in the United States than in other countries and has worsened over time. When you toss a moldy tomato into the trash, you're wasting a greenhouse gas intensive product. You're also sending it to a landfill where it will generate methane. So it's hard to realize how much food waste is really thrown away until you start home composting. I end up now only taking out the trash cans about once a month, and they're rarely full at that. In fact, I don't think I've ever filled my trash can here. Much of what I would have previously thrown out, I have recycled or composted. What can we compost? There's lots of good things. Vegetable peelings, fruit waste, tea bags, plant prunings, all sorts of things like this are fast to break down and provide important nitrogen as well as moisture. It's also good to include things like cardboard egg boxes, scrunched up paper, and even fallen leaves. So much less of it goes in the trash. And if you know what goes into your compost, you can also ensure, if you have a garden, that you don't have any dangerous chemicals going into the food you yourself are growing as well. If you're buying organic, you can compost organic as well. So one of the things is doing what you're doing now. Learn more and act. Reduce your use of plastics made from fossil fuels. When I go to the grocery store, I bring reusable cloth bags for fruit and veggies. This is an example from the Earthling company. But think, reduce, reuse, recycle, and repurpose. Sometimes you can do things with plastics that you already have. I've even moved to shampoo bars rather than plastic bottles, and I have to say, I really, really love my shampoo bars. If you're buying things online, maybe have multiple things shipped together. Learn more and act again with new appliances. Check out the energy efficient rating. And also figure out, is your refrigerator or the one you're considering a carbon bomb? I recently learned something new. NPR's series Living on Earth showcased a series about an environmental reporter that thought he was doing the right thing, only to find out the refrigerator he bought uses HFCs. This chemical is 3,710 times worse for the climate than carbon dioxide. Now, while manufacturers are moving to isobutane instead, they're still selling the old technology. And there are proper ways to dispose of these old refrigerators and make sure that these chemicals are actually captured. But if you just toss it out, that's a lot of other chemicals going into the environment. Think about reducing existing stressors on ecosystems. Wildlife face lots of challenges from a number of different directions. And these challenges are amplified by climate change. Keep your cats indoors. Each year, outdoor cats kill more than 1 billion birds in the US and Canada. Keeping cats inside is safer for them and better for the birds. Think about landscaping your yard for wildlife. You can create shade for wildlife and for yourself. Gardens, trees, and native flowers are good for people and birds too. Planting native plants definitely helps our native bees, dragonflies, and butterflies by providing habitat. And we depend on insect pollinators for our food too. And watching butterflies, what a stress reliever. So thinking about eliminating chemicals that are harmful to wildlife as well. Thinking about overuse of pesticides. Companies that claim to mosquito shield your property can't put a dome over your house. Instead, they spray expensive chemicals and harmful chemicals that can kill these beneficial insects like dragonflies, butterflies, and bees. Native predators like dragonflies are very, very effective to control things like mosquitoes, and they're free. That's my favorite part. So you can also ask that your home and your neighborhood not be sprayed by the state by Googling mosquito spray, Massachusetts opt out. In the last few years, there have been a lot of planes flying over parts of Massachusetts spraying for mosquitoes. I'd much rather spend those millions and millions of dollars on other things and let the dragonflies do their job. So next steps, get involved. Join and support local land trusts, support and advocate for land protection plans, and how about sustainable stow? This is a really good example of how you here at home have an opportunity to be more involved and see also what your neighbors are doing, see what your town is doing, and help your local area with what you can do and share ideas too. So I'm going to actually open it up to questions too, but I know Rick probably has some things that he would like to also say about sustainable stow as well. So if we have any questions, I would say let me know if you'd like that question to be answered by Rick about sustainable stow, or anybody else in his, I know Sharon's with sustainable stow as well, or myself, and I will do my best to answer the question. The best thing about what you've done today is you're starting to learn more, but there's always more to learn, and scientists are learning more every day about where we are. So I hope you will continue to learn more along the way as well. So if we have any questions, you can either unmute yourself or put them in the chat. That's also a great way as well.
fossil fuels to meet our goals. And 20% of the cars need to be electric. So we've got some very dramatic changes to make, and that's just the beginning. And that's why we're running this series, and we'll keep working on that.
And it's really understanding that all of us can make a difference. Some people may or may not be able to put solar panels on their homes, but we can all help to reduce waste in many ways. We can even turn down the heat in our homes just a little bit. There are lots of different things that we can do that are small changes, but there are also some big changes that certainly we need to be looking at the state and town levels as well. One thing that also you all can do as part of Sustainable Stowe, but as voters, is thinking about what can I do to encourage my town and my state to do more at the state level. And obviously we had a big climate change bill that recently passed. That was also due to pressure from voters. So, and from various sustainable groups. I'm sure Sustainable Stowe was telling people about that as well.
Oh, we were. And Arnie, who is here, I see him now, was very instrumental in helping us lobby Beacon Hill on that bill.
Absolutely. And it really is with a lot of people working together. Now, I noticed somebody asked, how does Massachusetts compare to other states on carbon footprints? How about the US versus other countries? So certainly it does depend on the state. It does depend on, you could say even portions of this state are different, and certainly other countries are different as well. But what it really comes down to is me by myself. I can't affect what another country is doing. I can affect what I'm doing, and I can help to contribute to affect what my town is doing and what my state is doing. So certainly as a country, we need to do more. But even after the US withdrew from the Paris Climate Accord, although they're in the process of trying to get back in, it came down to the mayors and the governors. Many mayors and governors said, we are going to still do our part. Even if the United States is not in Paris, we are going to try to do our part. So when we think about what we're doing as individuals, we can make a difference on an individual basis. But again, we want to think about also what can we do to affect what our state is doing, our town is doing, even what our neighborhood is doing, and talk to our neighbors as well. That's a great way to make people more aware. Again, composting is pretty easy to do and makes really, really nice gardens too. So that can actually make a difference, and it's not hard to do. So there are big things that seem overwhelming, but that's where our votes can count. And that's where other organizations like Sustainable Stowe can help to get people together to make a difference.
Joy, I can't see, or Tina, I can't see the chat box right now. Are there any questions in the chat box?
So I'm looking, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Joy. I just answered a couple for you. One was inquiring as to whether it would be available recorded, and also if you did lectures. So I just sent them your website.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So somebody also asked about how, what's going on with insurance companies. So when a lot of people know someone who maybe says they don't believe in climate change, but the insurance companies do. If you look at what the insurance companies are saying, they believe in climate change. They're terrified. Insurance companies are terrified. When you think about businesses, they're really being affected by it. They're being affected by flooding. They're being affected by tornadoes. They're being affected by hurricanes and wildfires. They are being affected by every single thing that climate change is doing in terms of these mega disasters. So that is a really great way. If you are trying to talk to someone about climate change, maybe a relative or somebody else or someone you know that is not so sure about it, think about what will affect them. It's your pocketbook, right? It's how might it affect you monetarily? You say, I don't live on the coast. That's okay. But what if your insurance company also insures people on the coast? Guess whose insurance is also going to go up? Eventually yours will as well. So you'll see a little bit of a difference there too.
So I do have a question from Jefferson. Go ahead.
Yeah, I have a quick question for houses or areas where solar may not be practical, maybe due to trees or for whatever reasons. How how genuinely useful are alternative electrical programs that were reliant on, say, renewable energy credits? Is that genuinely useful, or?
Well, so some things it really wouldn't relate. For example, I put all that insulation in my house. Oh my goodness, that made such a huge difference, not only keeping my home cooler in the summer, but warmer in the winter. So insulation is something that everybody can do, no matter where you are.
Mhm.
There's some great inventions that I've been seeing coming out online that are like these really novel wind turbines that aren't really turbines. There's some that spin like this way, and there's some that just vibrate back and forth in the wind. So in the next, number of years, keep a lookout. It may be that you say, I can't do solar, but I could do this little wind thing that might be designed specifically for homes. Again, technology is moving very quickly. In many cases, parts of Europe are leading the way, but we've got a lot of innovative solutions that could come out here from the United States, especially with more, if we get more federal money involved in that. So stay tuned. There's a lot of options that will be coming out, but it's also being aware of what's out there. You say, okay, I can't invest in my home, but maybe there are ways that you can help other places in town to invest or be aware of opportunities. There are lots of places now. Schools are adding, in many cases, electrical storage systems or panels or both. A good example might be parking lots. Are there parking lots in town that could have solar panels in them and maybe help with rates for the town as a whole? There are lots of different, even like REI in Natick, you go park under the solar panels. It's great. You keep your car cool in the summer and you don't have to scrape snow off it in the winter. There are lots of ways where people are thinking out of the box, but especially where there are open areas where you could park under a solar panel. That's a really novel way to do it. Unfortunately, in some places, they're making more solar fields where they just clear a field of, natural plants and things like that, and they put solar in it. But that also requires building infrastructure to do that. In some cases, they're trying to actually farm under solar panels. That's being done a little bit differently. But there are a lot of novel approaches that are coming out now. And just because it's not here today doesn't mean it might not be being piloted out there somewhere or come out in the next few years. So, always try to learn more as much as you can and just kind of be open to what's out there and share information. That, again, is another fantastic resource. Somebody had just asked in the chat about storage. Storage is work in progress. It's getting better and less expensive. Certainly, it's not feasible for everybody right now, but things are happening fast. And through a group like Sustainable Stow, that's a great way to network and share information. And that's one of the biggest keys is if you find out something or you have more questions, you have a resource where you can ask and share those resources. I don't know if we have any more questions that I missed from the chat. Rick, did you have anything else that you or anybody else from Sustainable Stow would like to add? I know you have some more events coming up, so I don't know if you want to say anything about next
We'll
plan.
have our next speaker will be the third Wednesday of May.
Mm-hmm.
We're still working on who that speaker will be.
So stay tuned.
Yeah, Arnie or Sharon, do either of you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I just want to, I was a couple minutes late because I was on a natural solutions webinar. So that was a good evening for webinars, but this was just wonderful, Joy. This was just an amazing presentation. Really brings it home.
Yeah.
What we're looking at. I do want to say that in Stow, we're really trying to get people aware of what they need to do, what's happening with the climate, and the actions they need to take. questions about, well, maybe I can't do solar on my roof, but you can install a heat pump in your house. That's going to help. You can look at doing a hybrid vehicle or an electric vehicle if that's a possibility. And those two components in our rural community really combined are the largest component of our emissions profile, as well as protecting all of the conservation and natural land that we have and want to protect in our town.
And conservation land and buffer zones are so important, not only for flooding. Sometimes people will even look at, if there are large buildings, putting rain gardens in or wildflower gardens in to help deal with flooding issues. People might even be thinking out of the box, like, okay, do I need to buy food that's been trucked across this entire country, or can I go to a lovely apple orchard in Stowe instead? So there are other things that we can do that aren't so difficult to do, but I do want to challenge you to think about what are some of the other things that you can do. Every day in our lives, there are things where we can make choices. And it might even be something like, even during COVID, I've been doing this a lot. I combine trips. If I'm going out, I wait and I try to combine a couple different things on a trip. But pre-COVID, how many of us might have made a bunch of different trips instead of combining that trip? There are lots of small things we can do that can add up. There are lots of bigger things we might be able to do that can add up too. There's no reason why we can't do multiple things, some big things, some medium things, and some small things. So I'm going to leave you with encouraging you to maybe make a little banana bread, maybe put your leftovers in the freezer. And I don't know about you, but I truly enjoy leftovers sometimes, because you know what? That means one last night of cooking. So think about things that you can do locally, and maybe even you'll start a garden with your local compost too.
Thank you, Joy. It's been great having you with us tonight. Really appreciate it.
much.
Tina, anything else from you?
No, I'm just so glad. Thank you, Joy. This was so great. And thank you, Rick, for starting this collaboration. I think it's great.
And keep learning, everybody. There's always more that all of us can learn. Myself, and I definitely encourage you to check out some of the other great resources we have. That program on living on Earth was fantastic. I knew nothing about carbon bombs in my refrigerator.
It's on WBUR. It's a great program.
It's on WBUR, absolutely. But you can listen to it on podcasts. You don't have to listen to it at 7 in the morning when it's on. You can listen to it later.
Right, right.
So thank you, everyone, for a great night. Thank you for joining us. And if you have any questions, you
Thank
can
you,
also reach out to
everyone.
me later on my website, thejoysofnature.com.
Great. Thank you again, Joy.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Joy, and organizing.